Welcome. I'm Tracey Webster from ASCY, and we're here with Dr. Jean Clinton to talk about some troubling trends in early learning and care around separation, adjustment to care, and the stress of COVID-19 on children, parents, and educators. Together with my colleagues, Busija and Nicole Colterman, we're going to tackle the daunting question of what to do when what usually works doesn't. Dr. Jean Clinton is a child psychiatrist, author, knowledge translator, and champion of the work that each of you do in early learning and care every day. Her greatest joy is being a mother of 5 and a grandmother of 7. Her work focuses on unlocking the science of the brain to make knowledge accessible to support mental health and well-being. It's great to have you with us, Jean. Welcome.
I'm so excited for this conversation, guys. And one of the other parts of my introduction has to be a great friend of ASCY and a champion till the end of my last breath for early childhood and early childhood educators. So I'm thrilled to be able to be part of this conversation as we think together about this challenging times.
Well, Dr. Jean, today we hope to continue the conversations that we started with you early in the pandemic with the series of recordings and dialogues called Surviving and Thriving Through COVID-19. So I'd really like to get your initial thoughts on our current situation. When we think about our childcare system, we're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of COVID, believe it or not. And people are tired. They're operating in survival mode. We're seeing anxious parents, distressed children, stressed educators, and mental health concerns are at an all-time high. So what are your initial thoughts about that?
Well, I think the very first thing, Tracey, is to acknowledge that this has been a horrific, unpredictable, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. It's been a VUCA time that has just been a challenging time for so many of us, for all of us. But, I've had lots of reinforcement for the work that I've done. But you know what? You guys as early childhood educators have not received the messages that I see you. I understand what you're going through. Praise the creator or whoever is that great force for you being here through it all. The ideas that I have about how to manage these uncertain times. Really, I want you to know that I see you and that within you, there is a spirit, a drive, you're turning up. And if we can help you today to touch into that drive, why you turn up, that passion, why you got into childcare in the first place, I hope it re-energizes you a little bit. It's not about just saying, oh yes, well, you must attend to self-care. Well, what the heck, I've never done it. But there are other things that we're going to talk about that I think will really help. But we also know that the emotion, Tracey, that you talked about, the people being tired and parents being tired, that I want you to know that we know the emotions spread, that as the adults in children's lives, we need to become detectives and better able to know where our emotions are coming from. Because when we can understand that and lend kids are calm, and we'll talk more about this, we need to bring our own calm. So I know we're going to get into things about how your confidence is feeling, but the key messages we're going to get to is, I'm going to really push you to think about what are the things that you can control and what are the things that are out of your control. How can you think about some of the situations rather than as barriers and yet another heckish thing that you have to do, but opportunities to do things differently. So at the end of this session, I hope that we're going to be able to all have a sense of hope, of hope for moving forward, of bringing our best selves to what we do, because you're not in this alone. So I'm wondering though, Tracey, what are you hearing from operators? What are they telling you is going on in their centers?
So one of the things that we have heard a lot about from folks in the field is concerns about COVID babies born since the start of the pandemic, who perhaps have been in isolation with their families, with much less exposure to people and the outside world. Educators are telling us that often when they see these babies come into care, that the period of adjustment is a lot longer, and that perhaps the separation anxiety that they are experiencing, seems to be happening as well for a lot longer than is typical. And I think that educators are really struggling to support parents with that process. We used to know what to say, right? Separation anxiety and adjusting to care is something that is, an everyday concern for educators. And, we deal with it all the time. But right now, it's hard to know what to say. So, from your perspective, Dr. Clinton, what do we need to be aware of when it comes to COVID babies?
Yeah, well, Tracey, I know this well because you said about being a nana to 7. They're 5 and under. So I have, my children have, I say I have because I love them to pieces, but I have a whole slew of COVID babies. So at least four of the babies have been born during COVID. And so I've had all of this fretting as well. I want to tell you a personal story first, if I can, if that's all right. Is that okay? My son and daughter-in-law, so Andrew and Abby, have Liam, who's 5, who we looked after him all day yesterday, and Ella, who's 2. Now, Ella is temperamentally, she's a cautious little thing. She's gorgeous. She's interested and talks away, but she is a cautious and slow to warm. So when Abby was going back to school in September, like just when she was turning 2, I must admit, she's still nursing, for comfort. And so I must admit, I was pretty anxious about how is our beauteous little Ella going to manage this, because she had been to her pediatrician a couple of times, and she did not like this stranger touching her. And as we talked about it, we recognized, holy moly, as the other older kids had lots of adults picking them up and touching them and being used to others being in their space, but little Ella Bella hadn't had that, right? So of course, within 2 days, in she goes, loves it, just going with the flow. Like, who could have predicted? I didn't predict it. All that worry for nothing. Anyway, I just wanted to share that story, but I also know what parents are going through as my daughters think about what is it that the kids are not getting that they would have got previous to COVID. And I would love to shift that thinking. And instead of thinking, what have the kids not had because they're COVID babies, to shift it to what have they had? What have they had? So when I think of Ella and I think of little Kieran, who's just 2, my daughters, and the 2 new babies, what they have had is intense presence with their parents. Intense presence when COVID allowed, that they were just smothered in hugs when we were allowed to have that. So there have been positive things. But the other is technology that has been a big positive, because even though we had very little contact with Ella, for example, for the first part, we were on FaceTime or the portal, and she knew who we were. She knew who we were, but it was weird when she came to our house for the first time, she was making strange. She was making strange, even though she knew us on the portal. What's all this big long rant about? It's about our mindset makes such a difference. If we think that the COVID babies, the children born in the time of COVID, are missing out on something, then we have a deficit lens. If we meet the children where they are and with the experience that they have had, then we don't have that doubt coming into our head. And I looked up Confucius's statement about uncertainty creates doubt, and doubt creates fear. So, mindset. It's not that they've missed out, it's that they've had different experiences. But having said that, what have for some of the kids been the experiences? And it may well be that they have not had, like our little Ella Bella, have not had the experience of being with strangers. And we know that stranger anxiety is typical, it's normal. You know, around 7-8 months, kids recognize there is the other. And then by 18 months, that might come out to be a separation anxiety. But when kids get to know adults, know that they are present, that they are positive, that they're warm and responsive, then the gates of connection open up. What's worrisome to me, and what you described, Tracey, is that the adults are worried that this is taking longer than it should. And I want to help people reframe it and say it's taking as long as it needs to take. That we need to really kind of shift and say, that was then, this is now. How can I meet this little one where they are? How can I make the pattern of stress for them that much more predictable? So what we know is what's key when these little ones are coming in, and I mean the full range of childcare age, that what's so important is that they feel safe. So that means routines and predictability. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. That they feel secure. That many of you will have primary care arrangements with children when they come in, particularly with the infants. Well, if you've got that primary care arrangement, but the little one seems to be soothed by someone else, go with it. You know, don't be stuck in your methodology. So being seen and being soothed. So those 4 S's: safety, security, seen, and soothed. And just say, it's going to take longer. Their little brains, in terms of their attachment and their ability to be with others, will grow as they are meant to grow, because it's the experiences that they have that build that brain. And so the experience they didn't have with multiple adults is now being with them, but it's taken them longer. Don't think a deficit model, there's something wrong. Be with them, meet each child where they are, and don't worry that they've missed something. No, they've received something different. But now let's make sure that they feel that sense of security, of being seen. Make certain that you're doing what you can do to diminish their stress and yours, but we'll talk about that.
Thank you, Jean, so much. I love the way that you are really getting us to shift our mindset and talking about those 4 S's. That really is key. You started to speak to the full range of child care and the ages there. So we started off talking about the COVID babies, but we really are seeing it, the impact on preschoolers as well, going back and forth between childcare and isolation and at home, and the inconsistency between the educators for that same reason. And that's so unpredictable. You started to speak to how important predictability and reliability is for children. So can you kind of give us some key messages for those educators that are struggling too, because they aren't there all the time, because they are in and out of the program as well?
Yeah, well, and Nicole, thanks for that. The parallel process here is so important to recognize that what the kids are going through with the unpredictability of caregivers, oh my Lord, the caregivers are going through it too. You know, where am I this day? Are we in? Are we out? Are we emergency? You know, just so the idea about creating as much predictability as you can. So let's talk from the child's perspective. So what that means is it's really important, even more so during these difficult, challenging times, that caregivers find some way to communicate, to say, this is what I observed with little Jamie today. I noticed that this is something that soothes him. I've noticed that this is something that he turns to for security. And there may not be consistency in the person, but there's consistency in the relationship between the persons or peoples. There's consistency in communication that happens so that the interaction with the child is as positive and the environment is made as predictable as possible. So it's not ideal, absolutely not. And you know, just to go a little into the neuroscience of this, the brain likes certainty. The brain likes certainty. When everything is cool and calm, the brain really likes novelty, but that ain't right now. That's not right now. So the brain likes this predictability, and the fact that the educators are not able to do all of that is very stressful. What happens is the emotional brain, the limbic system, is firing more, and the thinking brain goes offline. And that takes up lots of energy and it causes fatigue. So what do we know? We know when you're not going through it alone, when you've got someone that you can converse with, and this needs to be a priority in all centers, that you have opportunities, even if it's just, you know, even if it's just some point of texting. If you can't get physically together for meetings, we need you to be together. You know, some of the research on this is stunning. I just heard recently that if you're looking at a hill, a steep hill by yourself, you kind of can calculate, oh, this is going to be really hard. But if you stand, you bring the experiment, you bring in a friend, the task becomes at least 30% less onerous in your brain, in imaging. What the heck? We are social. We need each other. Reach out and don't be on that. And, you know, so I'd be curious to know how people have gone about this. How have they, you know, recognized that they need to be connecting? How have they dealt with some of these issues? Does what I say make sense? Is that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it makes sense to some of the educators. They have definitely noticed that there is that need still for connection. And we're seeing them doing some of the things that they were doing when we were locked down and they weren't in the childcare center. So we're seeing some educators who are possibly isolating, or the children are at home, and we're seeing them doing things like still having Zoom calls or FaceTimes or doing story times with them and connecting that way, and or sending photos. Maybe that child's isolating to see what was happening that day at the child care center, or when you come back tomorrow, this is what's going to happen. So it's nice to see that some educators are still doing that, and, you know, sharing that with parents too, so they could see what's happening in the center. And we know that virtual visits were happening before, and we still see many virtual visits happening with parents getting a chance to see what's going on in the center right now. So it's really nice to see that it gives a little bit of hope that that's happening. Are there any other messages that you could give us around that, Dr. Jean?
Yeah, I think that we need to pull out all the stops with these exciting ideas. I think that what you guys are doing, creating the opportunities for educators to get together and dialogue about what's going on, what's worked, or sharing that as you do, you know, your professional coaching. Because what I take, Leslie, from so much of what you're saying is you're building on the first R, relationship. You're saying that I'm going to reach out, you know, we should never have called it social distancing. It should always have been physical distancing and emotional connection and social connection. But what you're emphasizing is what I think is the number one job and priority during this time. It's not making sure that the kids are following some plan or, you know, all of that kind of stuff, but for the first hour of relationships, because we know that in reaching out, you know, and doing these Zoom calls and you know, I think you had also described if a little one is having a hard time on the way in, doing a FaceTime as they're coming in, so that it's easier. So you're ramping up. How can we use technology to be that building of relationships, which is the heart of the matter? And as well, I love that you emphasized reaching out to the parents as well, because the parents are going through a whole lot as well. You know, where before you might have been able to have a little one who was having separation issues, the parent would be able to come in and maybe sit for a little bit and read a book and then hand the little one over to the educator, right? Now you can't do that. So you've got the parent feeling, oh my, I'm pushing them off the abyss into what do I know is happening there. And so that communication, that first hour relationship, understanding where the parent might be at is so hugely important. So we need to boost. I love it that you're giving some examples, but we need to boost it, that it's happening in all centers, not just some centers. So we need to be saying, why is it that some centers are feeling so overwhelmed that they're not coming up with these kind of strategies? And I see that as a big part of the role that you're already playing by doing this kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yes, it's so true. That connection is key, Jean. And thank you, Leslie, for sharing what some of the centers are doing. And I really hope that that continues to help with the parents' transitions, the educators and the children. So speaking to the parents there, Jean, they really are struggling too. And I can say that as a parent myself, it's been a whirlwind over these past couple of years. And, you know, parents working at home, it's been a big struggle, a balance between online learning and having to work. And am I, you know, putting my kids on the back burner because of that? And, or those families that have had to be out on those front lines and working outside of the home have not had that opportunity to, you know, be at home with the children or take time off of work. So they're worried, you know, are my children getting the best supports that they need? Are they going to be left behind? So there's lots of worries and stressors there. And another one that I wanted to speak to, and we've been talking a little bit, and Dr. Jean, I've heard you talk about technology and the importance of the connection that's been happening through that. But I know another struggle parents are having is screen time, is too much screen time. And I will be guilty of that, and I feel so bad. But, you know, I do what I can, as much as I can, to support my children and myself. But I was wondering if you had any messages for parents or for educators to support parents that are going through this.
Oh, wow. Well, so the very, very first one, Nicole, and thank you again for your question and your insights. The very first thing is give yourself a break. We are in a crisis. We're in a pandemic. So it was all very well when the world was predictable and known and not VUCA, that we could come up with, or the American Association, the Academy of Pediatrics and CPS came up with these guidelines for this is ideal for screen time. But we're in a freaking pandemic. And so we need to use the resources at hand to help us get through and do what we need most to do. And so I'm not saying have the kids on screens all of the time, not at all. And I'm not saying to have the kids as have the screens as babysitters, not at all. But if you find that in order to do this really important meeting that is life or death job wise, then to put on a little PBS or Sesame Street video, Come on, that's all right. The thing is to make sure, and there's a great, oh, I should have looked this up before, I should have thought of this, but we'll post it after if that's all right. There's a great acronym from 0 to 3 called EAMS, about is video appropriate, it was the screen time appropriate, and it's all about things. Is it age appropriate? Is it interesting? Is it educational? Are you there with the child? So EAMS will post our, or if anybody can Google it while we're talking. So that's screens. That's screens. I think that we are in a time, and I'm talking to lots of different people when it comes to the well-being. What's giving me hope is the research that says we can build and create well-being, that we can, and we know what causes an unhealthy mind, and we can build and change our brain to change our mind to build that muscle of well-being. So I don't know if that strikes you as much as it strikes me, but that is so hopeful. You know, if I know that distractibility, loneliness, negative self-talk, and lack of purpose, if I know that those 4 things kick well-being in the butt, are there things as parents and as educators I can do? So those 4 again, if I can remember, can I remember, because I didn't write this down either. This is a problem with having interesting conversations with you guys. Yes, so distractibility. Can we take some time to recognize that our mind is being pulled in a whole bunch of different directions? And so just take in the day 3 times a minute. Just take a minute to focus on your breathing in and out. Don't call it self-care because we think that's selfish. Just say it's just the breath, man. It's just the breath. But we know from the science, in terms of distractibility, it focuses our attention by focusing on the breath. And that's just noticing, breathing in and breathing out, holding it for 4 and letting it out for 4. Major studies look at how effective that is. We can talk more about self-talk. I want to talk about self-compassion in some of our other questions here. But having negative thoughts, I used to think, I've got in my head, I've got this running narrative, you know, who knows, you know, I won't get into too shrinky, but, you know, I have a lot of negative things. Oh, you're not good enough, or, you know, you're not this, or you're not that, or why'd you do that, or you're not smart enough, or anyway, I've got lots of self-talk that's negative. And I saw this thing on self-compassion, and it just kind of stated, you know what, that gets you doodly squat. It gets you absolutely nowhere. Whereas you take a minute to say, I'm lovable. There's stuff in me that's okay. You don't have to say you're lovable if you don't want to go that far right from the start. But, you know, there's stuff in me that's okay. I'm showing up every day. I'm hanging in. If you change those negative thoughts to things, positive thoughts like that, it makes a difference. Having a sense of purpose absolutely makes a difference. So that's what I'm really hoping we get through and people feel today, that even though it's hard, that your confidence is being eroded, you have a magnificent purpose, and that is being human developers. So we can build a healthy mind. We can build a healthy mind. And I think that we can pass those things on to our parents to help them as well.
Thank
you think
you,
that's
Jane.
cool? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I really do. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that self-compassion, because another question we've had is, at this point in the pandemic, is it enough to be telling educators to focus on their self-care? Those were really great messages early on, but what do you say to needing more?
Oh, yeah. Do you know what? I'm talking to educators, I'm talking to judges, and, you know, just saying you have to look after yourself, people are going, You can cut that part out if we don't like it. But people are saying, what the heck are you talking about? My friends and family who are educators say, you know, oh, we're told to have self-care and then we're given 10 other things that we're supposed to do. And so many people say to me that self-care, you know, that you tried it at the beginning, you tried it, but now there's so many things on the list, there's no way that you're going to get on that list to say, how am I going to do this? So we have to take self-care outside of going outside of self. And two messages. One is, I think the mindset needs to shift, that we need to be saying self-care is not selfish. In fact, lending and learning where my calm is essential and a professional responsibility. So self-care to me needs to be about working on the internal, even though I love going and getting my manicure and pedicure. It really has to be more about the reflection on self. And so focusing on where is my happy place? I'd like everybody who hears this at the end of this to stop and say, where is the place where I find calm, where I have that happy place? Even just going there makes a difference. That's self-care, but not that other self-care that people think about as selfish. The other one that's huge for self-care is reaching out to others. Is huge. Is huge. The science of reaching out and helping others, the science of gratitude, changes your brain, and it changes your brain in a positive way that helps you be able to move negative thinking out the door. And as you know, remember we talked about that as a healthy mind. And then there is the reaching into self, and that's self-compassion. And that is, first of all, notice your suffering or the difficulty that's going on, and don't just, oh, I'm not going to pay attention to that. No, just accept it and don't judge yourself. Don't judge yourself. It's so important. Show kindness. Imagine if we treated ourselves like we treat our dearest friends. Can you imagine that world? Can you imagine that world? And that's the other things. Don't exaggerate your difficulties, but try and see them as plain as they are and accept them. And then the big thing for me is recognizing you're not alone. You're absolutely not alone. This is a shared experience. So I would love for people to have more permission to take the time for self-compassion, because I think that makes you a healthier person, that brings you to be a healthier educator and a healthier parent.
Wow, that was great, because as a parent, I've had all those thoughts go through my mind. You know, when do I put myself first, or do I put myself first? Or, and I really like that you said we have to shift from self-care, and it's not being selfish, and you know, but being calm. And I see that if I'm give myself that, maybe that what I would think is being selfish moment, then I will be more calm for my children. I will be more calm for others as well. And I think that's something that we really need to share with educators as well, is, again, calm begets calm. We've heard that before, right? And you talked about that earlier. Now, while we're thinking about educators, and I'm going to shift gears here a little bit, but when we've been visiting educators and speaking to educators, we've noticed that they're feeling that they're not fulfilling their responsibilities in the classroom around pedagogy and curriculum. It's just so much COVID screening and checklists and this and that happening. And what we're noticing is that they're worried that they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so in conversation with supervisors that we've had, we've told supervisors or asked supervisors to consider that perspective of the importance of giving staff that permission to take a step back from some of those busy things and be present and focus on relationships and focus on building those relationships with the children and possibly studying those relationships with the children. Could you speak more to that a bit?
Yeah, well, do you know, I love the question. I love the question because it really is what Tracey, when we were talking about this ahead of time, is focusing on a pedagogy of relationships. And, you know, we think about early childhood education and we think about development and, you know, we know the 5 domains of development and all that lot. And we create the conditions so that those domains, when you see the disposition, you can put things out in the environment so the kids, you know, go along. And then relationships are at the side. Mm-hmm. But now, more than ever, is the time to be, whoa, bringing that, examining, what do I mean by having relationships with kids? Because it's through the pedagogy of relationships that development and growth can occur, right? So it's kind of shifting it on its head. And so it means, well, if relationships are in fact the matrix for development and growth, what am I doing in my everyday practice to make sure that I'm stopping and saying, well, what does building a relationship with kids mean? Am I just a nice person? And that's so important, of course. Am I just a nice person? Or am I showing that I care? Am I observing what the children, what their dispositions for learning are in their relationships with other children so that I can foster that? Am I noticing where we see joy in the classroom, in the environment? Am I noticing resilience when kids have a hard time or parents have a hard time or I have a hard time and I get through it? And so resilience is not the absence of stress, but how you get through stress, and you recognize it in the other, and you say, man, oh man, that was a tough situation that you just got yourself through. You build the relationships, and quite frankly, covering the curriculum and pedagogy will absolutely happen only when you've got a solid base of kids being co-regulated by the adults in their lives who are talking about lending their calms. So we know that you can build these relationships through caring, through having high expectations of kids, by having developmentally appropriate materials out. But, you know, there was a woman called Jerry Paul who used to say, how you are is as important as what you do. How you are is as important as what you do. To me, that's the pedagogy of relationships. Does that sit? Does that sit well? Does that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I really think that you've sort of hit the nail on the head. You know, when it comes to thinking about relationships as the curriculum. And, you know, it opens the question, you know, what kind of study or research, you know, could be happening in classrooms, you know, based on those relationships, right? And, you know, you gave some examples, but, you know, I'm even thinking, you know, being able to study friendship. What does friendship mean in the classroom? How do toddlers show empathy? Another thought that I had when you were talking was just, you know, being intentional in terms of the invitations and provocations that are set up in the classroom, and thinking about what is it that's really familiar for children, and making sure that, you know, we're not, for example, you know, setting up the dramatic play as a spaceship when that is completely outside the realm of the child's experience, but thinking about what is, washing dishes, caring for babies, preparing food, you know, things that they've been seeing as in the home. And I just think, you know, that study, it makes me think about back to basics. And these are things that I think as early childhood educators, we do often in September when we have new groups of children, You know, we think about how can we focus on the child, the family. You know, it makes me think about All About Me. You know, that's something that we often did.
Mm-hmm.
And just to build on, you know, Leslie's strategies that she talked about around technology, you know, I think that communication with home, perhaps when you set up the environment, taking photos of the things that you've set up and send a quick message to the children, or even just the children that you know are struggling, about what's waiting for them when they come to daycare. You know, have the Play-Doh ingredients all set up on the table so that they know when they go, they're going to sit down with their educator and they're going to make Play-Doh. So I just think that, you know, it has really opened the door, this idea, this notion of thinking about relationships as curriculum, and having that be the focus of what educators are looking at in the classroom, and giving them the permission, you know, to take a step back and to really use that as what they're observing for when they're in the classroom with young kids.
Yeah, Tracey, I think that's so crucially important. And you know, I think about I think about the idea of being reflective and looking at, for example, the toddlers in relationship and empathy and friendship. And what I want to underscore is that what you think affects how you feel, affects how you act, but also how you feel affects how you think, affects how you act. So if you think that your job is to make everything safe physically, and you're too busy noticing what's happening with the children in terms of building their friendship, then that's going to affect you, how you feel and how you act. But if you say, you know, while I'm doing this, I'm going to be looking for joy, man. I'm going to be looking to see what else is happening around me. I'm going to replace this. Why the heck do I have to do this? With, wow, what am I seeing and what the kids are doing? And even, you know, heaven forbid that the kids actually take part in the cleaning up of things, but that's another story. But, you know, that what you think affects how you feel, affects how you act, I think is really important, because I don't want people to think this is more work. In fact, this is more joyful. This is more hopeful. And through that joy and hope, you get revitalized and re-energized. It gives you more. You stop worrying about the curriculum and say the pedagogy here is, what am I seeing in terms of relationships? You know, a funny little story about relationships that was provoked by what you were saying, Tracey, is so my daughter has 4-year-old twins. And when they were starting in this particular program in September, the place had a policy that siblings were never in the same classroom. Well, this is twins the twins have never been separated from each other for more than half an hour in their entire life. So what is this going to be about? And, you know, worries about it, and talking to the school about it, and they were so firm and they knew the best, and oh, what are you talking about? Oh, and all that. And what happened? The boys go in, they're in different classes, they are right as rain. As long as they can play together at recess, you know, or their breaks, as long as they get that touch in. So what a fabulous study that would be of the understanding of how children can adapt to new situations, maybe better than we expect them to. You know, they've got solid parental support behind them. But it would have been a lovely study to see how did they look at different relationships and connections within that? So instead of I can't, think about, well, this is what I can do. I can do these studies as you're talking about it. And so, you know, some questions I wonder if people could think about is, how do you find your calm when the kids are dysregulated, right? Think about how you do that. How do you take in a big breath? So your own relationship to self, as we're talking about this pedagogy of relationships, do you pause before you respond? Or do you do what I did so much as my little ones were under, you know, they had 5 that were very young. And how do you create these spaces that Tracey's describing where the kids get to connect with the other kids in a meaningful way? And how do you create the pedagogy of relationships with the families? So there are so many things to be thinking about. That it's exciting, but I don't want it to feel like more work. I want it to feel like smarter work or heart work rather than busy work. Oh, that's a good one, right? Heart work rather than busy work. How about that?
I want to go back to, you know, our purpose for pulling this discussion together before we wrap up. And, you know, COVID has really challenged the ways that we think and what we know and the ways that we find to respond. And, you know, we're interested in some final thoughts from you, Dr. Jean. If you can summarize for us, what do you hope people take away from this conversation? If you could give us just the bullet points.
Oh my goodness. Well, number one, what I hope people take away is you're seen. You're seen, and we are listening. We hear you. You matter. That the work of early childhood educators is so crucially important to the kids, to the families, and to our society, as some of you have heard when I talk about. So you absolutely matter. You're not hearing that nearly enough. I hope that I can kick some butt and get some changes going, but that's number one, absolutely number one. The second is a huge thank you for turning up. You know, the flexibility, the innovation, the changing barriers into opportunities that I've seen and heard across this province has been stunning. Keep it up. Keep it up, that turning up. And the other last thing that I would want to say is, if you can, think about nothing without joy. You start thinking about a pedagogy of relationships, the joyfulness in relationships, and you grab it, you seize it. And you also, though, when you think about joy, you start thinking about hope and of gratitude. And so I think I mentioned earlier, I would love if everybody were to stop and say to themselves, I'm doing the best I can with what I have. And I am also going to stop 3 times this week to measure and treasure the things you're grateful for. Because in these busy VUCA times, we absolutely can forget about that. So I am and will continue to be a huge, huge supporter of your work, but even more so, I'm hoping that today our wonderful conversation, which I've loved so much, Nicole, Leslie, and Tracey, I'm hoping that it inspires within you, touches deeper within you to say, we're almost there. We're almost at the finish line. And I've got this last good bit of juice that's going to get me through. So that's what I'm hoping.
think we're all hoping. Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you, Dr. Jean. So much great information that you've shared with us today, like always. For us as parents and educators, you've given us so much to reflect on and given hope. And I'm energized. I'm energized to take this conversation further with educators and possibly invite them to look at that pedagogy of studying relationships together. So again, thank you for being on this journey with us. You've been on this journey with us for so long, so we're happy. Please continue being on that journey with us. And we invite everybody if you want more information from Dr. Clinton, read her book, Love Builds Brains, follow her on social media, YouTube, or connect with ASCY on how to find some more resources. So again, thank you very much, Dr. Jean.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys. I've enjoyed every second of this. Thank you.